All right. Sara, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to have you on the show. And I'd love for you just to start by telling the audience a little bit about yourself, your career, and where you are today.
Sure. Well, let's see. I'll take the angle, which is starts with my education, which is pretty technical. I got 3 degrees in mechanical engineering, got my undergrad at UT Austin, went out to Berkeley for my master's and PhD. I focused in green design and manufacturing and minored in public health and energy and resources. So my passion was how do you green up the world of primarily like the semiconductor and electronics industry,
Yes.
because I thought during my lifetime that's going to be the biggest environmental impact. So that's what I was focused on. Worked in technical roles at like Intel and Applied Materials, the big behemoths in the industry, and then sort of shifted gears almost 180 when I realized whether these businesses were integrating the tools I was developing had more to do with business decisions than technical ones. So I really decided I needed to just learn how business decisions were made. And that's where I would make a bigger impact. And so I went to work at McKinsey & Company, which is more of a generic strategic management consultancy, but worked in the San Francisco office where the head of their semiconductor practice was. So I was able to stay in an industry I was familiar with at least, but doing very non-technical work. And got tremendous experience there. And then realized I didn't want to lose my technical background. And I was doing all, non-technical work. I loved it, but it was, pure business strategy. And so decided venture capital seemed like an industry that was the perfect blend of the both, skills of not losing my technical background by still meeting with entrepreneurs and learning about all their great ideas, and then helping all of the portfolio companies that the venture capital firm, invested in with all the different business challenges they had. So decided to try that out, joined a fund in San Francisco and loved it. It was what I thought it would be. And from there, I thought, if I'm going to be a venture capitalist long-term, I really need to get my hands dirty doing more operational work, because I've been in these technical roles and then in, strategy consulting, investing, but never running the business myself. And so I joined Advanced Micro Devices, which is a semiconductor company out in Sunnyvale, in the Bay Area, and working for the CEO who actually lived in Austin. And so I wanted to get back to Austin anyway, knowing, well, there were a lot of reasons for wanting to come back to Austin, but the career reason was there was very little venture capital in all of Texas, a lot of innovation, a lot of money, but all the capital was kind of going out to California, and there was not an investment in the community. And so I thought this, Austin and Texas was the place to be in venture capital, at least for the next several decades. And but meanwhile, I was at AMD for 11 years. I thought it was 10, but
Wow.
it was 11, so way longer than I planned. And it was just, I had so many tremendous opportunities during my time. I worked for 3 of the 4 CEOs directly, did lots of like strategy work, but then in merger and acquisition, which was very good for the venture capital experience, in that, I was buying these startup companies and integrating them into a bigger one, and that, were venture backed. And then and ran several business units. So I got more operating experience than I ever planned on, but it was really good. And just really like the people and like the work. But I also had 2 boys during that time. And my husband and I started a brewery company in Austin. And that was like a 3rd child in a way, so I just literally didn't even have time to think about what I really wanted to do. I was just more taking it as it came, like putting out the fires at work kind of thing, and not thinking that strategically about it. So anyway, I was asked to be, a few things came together. I was asked to be the executive sponsor of the Global Women's Forum, because I was the only vice president woman who had any technical or operational background. at the 15,000 employee company at the time, and there were about 12 other women VPs, and they were all in G&A functions. So I was it. The other thing was my youngest was able to watch a full feature film for like 90 minutes. And so then I all of a sudden had like uninterrupted downtime, like at home, where I could actually have a complete thought.
Right.
So I was like, okay, it's time to go figure out what I want to do that like fulfills me more, or just be more strategic about what I was doing. And knew I wanted to get back into the venture capital world eventually. So I started looking into that space again. And these things were happening at the same time, where my eyes were open to how in the world can it be I'm the only woman VP at this huge technical company where like 80+% of the employees are engineers or have a technical background, and I'm the only woman who has tech or operating experience. That's insane. But it's more insane that I didn't even realize it. And I've been here for like almost a decade. And so then that's when I really started doing more self-reflection of like, how could I be so unaware? And what should I do about this? And realized I had just had such a male-dominated background from being a mechanical engineer and, in semiconductors, in VC, even with a brewery, just like my whole world, And so I literally just was blind to it. That was my life, or that was my professional life. And then also came across some studies that showed when there are more women in senior leadership positions at companies, and I was focused on big corporate tech, they do significantly better financially. And so knowing I wanted to get back into venture, or thinking I did, I started looking at those numbers and seeing the same ridiculous financial outperformance that women-led companies had, yet even a bigger gap in terms of the lack of women in the industry. In terms of the women entrepreneurs getting the venture capital investing dollars, or the women general partners at funds that make the investment decisions. So I realized I had never even met another woman in venture when I was in a venture for myself in the Bay Area.
Wow.
But I hadn't realized it, until 10 years later or whatever. And so decided to start my own fund. And that was back in 2014, the end of 2014, left AMD at the very beginning of 2015. And now we've got the second fund raised kind of under our belt. We True Wealth Ventures invest in early stage women-led companies exclusively that are either improving environmental or human health. So finally back to my roots, what I wanted to do. And we invest across the country. When we closed our first fund in January 2018, it was the largest, like traditional, typical venture capital fund ever raised with an explicit gender diversity strategy. And that was at like $20 million, which is small for the venture capital world. So that just says, where things are, I guess. So they've gotten better since then, but not substantially.
The thing that I love about your story that I'm hearing is that it's not about you. It's about bringing other women up with you and highlighting that there aren't a lot of women in that space. And, my path was in a male-dominated world as well, starting out in the sports industry. Actually, when I worked in cruise ships first, just totally male-dominated leadership, and then into the sports industry for about a decade. Again, another male dominated organizations, and then got into tech as well. And so it is an interesting dynamic, back in the day, back earlier in our time, in our careers, people weren't talking about it either, right? We weren't aware of it because it wasn't being discussed. We just thought that was how it was, right? Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate what you're doing and love your vision. How would you measure success for yourself in this today?
Well, I guess the traditional measurements of success are, I'm trying to create this virtuous cycle of investing exclusively in women-led companies. So we're not even looking at companies that don't have a woman that's either like the CEO or one of the co-founders or one of the top C-suite executives. So investing exclusively in those companies, getting the capital and the innovation dollars to those leaders, and then trying to make them as successful as possible in terms of growing very quickly and exiting for, $100 million kind of plus kind of exits. So then those founders make a lot of money, but also our investors make money, and our investors are 80% women as well. And so it starts this virtuous cycle of getting the capital to the women. And the other mission that we have that we didn't start out with, but now do, is the fact that when we closed our first fund, 80% of our investors were women. And that was apparently unprecedented. And we did a poll when we realized, wow, we've got lots of women. And compared to, other people, I guess nobody else has this. They had never invested, most of them had never invested in a venture fund before. Most of them had never been invited to invest in a venture capital fund before.
Wow.
So we realized, of course, like in retrospect, my partner and I were like, well, we're both have backgrounds in venture and we've never been invited to invest in somebody else's fund.
Wow.
So it's just not happening. And it's this very insular industry. And we think women, who are projected to actually be controlling 2/3 of US investable assets by 2030, have they have to invest in venture if we're going to continue to maintain our innovation ecosystem, because they're going to be controlling so much of the wealth. But that's the most efficient way to get capital to these women entrepreneurs, because they care more. Just women investors care more, not only about the diversity and the management teams and the values those management teams have, but also about the impacts the companies make. So they're not going to only invest in more diverse teams or like investment managers, but companies or investment funds that are making a more positive impact in the world. And so that's the goal, is getting more women to invest, and then making sure that those investments are wildly successful, so then they can reinvest and, change the gender dynamic, I think, most effectively and fast.
Incredible. I love it. So let's shift a little bit. So really, you and I have talked about our belief that more and more people are becoming sick in the corporate environment. And prior to leaving my corporate job, I was diagnosed with 2 autoimmune diseases that I believe were primarily caused by the chronic stress my body was experiencing due to my working style combined with my work environment. But my body, I'm learning more and more about stress and inflammation in the body, and my body really became addicted to cortisol, which, when your body gets into that fight or flight mode, it produces cortisol and it can become addictive. And I really, in hindsight, I thrive on challenges. And I really actually took pride in being able to take on these stressful roles, take on more and more. Yeah. But meanwhile, my body was getting sick. And so my goal with the podcast is to really understand what other women are doing, to prioritize themselves and maintain boundaries in their lives. And hopefully along the way, understand what I can do differently moving forward. And so you've had such a great amount of success, and you've worked in the tech industry and now in the VC world, which I know can be, in that fundraising phase, can be probably very stressful. How have you found time for yourself, or what do you prioritize in order to keep that, keep from burning out and keep that balance in your life?
The answer to that has definitely evolved over the years. And I would say, like, in the early days, exercising, like cardio and step, like way back in the day, right? Yes. It was just like this crazy stress treadmill, and I would release through lots of cardio exercise.
Yeah.
That's not how I do it anymore. I mean, I do my spinning classes and stuff, but it's very different. And so I'd say the most recent answer is a couple-fold, but really making sure that I'm doing what I'm put on the planet to uniquely do. And even though I loved lots of aspects similarly to you, love the challenge, love to prove myself, like whatever, I was always looking for the next best problem to solve. It wasn't fulfilling to my soul. It was fulfilling to my ego, but not to like, what's my, so anyway, I had to do lots of internal reflection of like what literally energizes me, what drains me, to a 30-minute, 60-minute kind of interval, so I could really understand who I wanted to work with, what type of people I wanted to work with, what types of problems that I want to solve, like how much could I work a day, how did I de-stress best, like all this kind of stuff. And it took a long time to even like start self-reflecting and evaluating, just because I had not been thinking. I was just so externally focused, and I'm not taking the time to figure that out. So it was, a process of years before I realized I even wanted to start this fund, and then years to get it up and running and formulate what I wanted to do. And lots of, journaling and reading and, all that kind of stuff. But now that I am really doing what I want to do in the world, it's very different, because now it's not like I'm burning out at the end of the day. Even though I'm still a workaholic, it's fulfilling work. And so it feels completely different so I'm working maybe more even than I used to, but it does not feel like that. It feels like I'm like skipping through life. I'm like, I can't even believe that this is my job, so that's the bigger answer. The little answer is I've learned how to really carve out my mornings to not schedule them. And so I meditate during that time. I exercise during that time. I catch up on my emails. I read articles. I listen to, things like some podcasts sometimes when I'm getting ready or whatever. And I also have that time for emergency calls. And, oh my gosh, I've got to set up a phone call with that CEO and tell her this or whatever. And so I have the flexibility to really work on the big things, which are myself and getting my mind kind of right, and have the luxury to catch up on some industry news kind of that I would never have time for at 3 p.m. or whatever. And that way it's not my evenings where I'm catching up on my email, and I also do that, but it's usually by the evenings, it's like, oh, I got to get ready for this meeting tomorrow, and I got to do this, whatever, review this thing, or it's not luxurious, time, or it doesn't feel like luxurious.
Right. Yeah.
So that's but then again, it's just given my current lifestyle and like what works with my current lifestyle. But I just think figuring out what it is that works, I didn't spend the first couple decades of my life thinking about that. It was just, and some of it is you start in jobs where you don't necessarily have the freedom to do that. It's like you have to show up at that meeting no matter what. So it's very different. But I have to be like cognizant of, I am the boss now, you know what I mean? Or I'm my own boss. And so it's very different, but still just being self-aware and trying to figure it out is, I think, something people don't spend enough time doing.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. If you had to go back to one of your previous roles in corporate America, and knowing what you know now about what what that time and that space means for you in the mornings or whenever you find that time for yourself, how would you be any different as a leader? Would you do things differently for your team or, for other women to help them protect their time? I just think as leaders, I think there is a responsibility of the leaders in the organization. There's the responsibility of the individual, but I do believe that there is a leadership responsibility. So anything you would do different?
It's a good question. I mean, and it's something I've thought a lot about, because I think one of the advantages I had in my career ladder climbing in corporate America was that I had blinders on, and that I mean, literally, I had 2 CEOs that I worked for that had no idea I had children. So that proved to me, after I got over the shock of that, like I literally don't share my personal life with my work colleagues. And it was because I just had this wall of my experience, working at all my workplace was just all these, not only just men, but older men, several decades, sometimes
Right.
older than me. And so I didn't have a lot in common in terms of like, what we had in common was the work problems we were trying to solve, it's
Right.
not what we were doing this weekend,
Right.
um, nor did I care,
Right.
And so that set this huge boundary up, which I think allowed them to ask me to do things that they wouldn't have asked me to do if they had known I had a family.
Right.
And so that was beneficial. But I do think as I got more senior and become like the executive sponsor of the Global Women's Forum, for instance, then I started sharing a lot more of like, I do have boys at home, like, and you need to invest in your childcare as an investment in your career. And, and so I talked a lot more about it. And what I didn't realize was how thirsty the women were for understanding how to balance it and what to do. And so I think, so I would, my first thought is I would share more along my path of how I was doing it. But on the flip side, I think because I didn't share, there was an unawareness,
Right.
which was advantageous to me.
Right. I think it is a hard thing. And I remember even things like, because I was the same way. Here's the professional me. My personal me is at home. When I go home, that's the personal me. I had two personas, which I think in the end was a problem. That was part of my problem, not for achieving, but for me personally breaking down.
Yeah.
And I think where I started to get cracks is I moved from one organization to another, and I got to this new organization, and I started getting friend requests on Facebook from people that were on my team. And I'm like, oh, no, we don't like cross boundaries here. Like, what's going on? So for the longest time, I really just tried to keep that separate. I think more and more the lines have just become crossed, that people are, friends on Facebook, and that, I think that's a positive move, is that people are more and more starting to be able to bring their whole self to work. And, but it is, I remember that line specifically when it, just crossing that line of, okay, I'm starting to really share who I am at work. So your company, True Wealth Ventures, invests in women-led companies improving environmental and human health, which you've mentioned. And I'm curious about your assessment process for the companies you choose, because as we're talking about women in the workplace, and you're talking about investing in female founders and their companies, can you share anything in particular that you look for in the founding members of the company when you're determining whether you'll invest or not?
So besides, of course, looking to make sure there's at least one full-time woman in the C-suite or is one of the co-founders. And actually for our first fund, all CEOs were women, but that's not a requirement. But we look for very strong, woman at the helm that's going to really influence the strategy, have significant ownership, and really, influence the direction heavily. And by the way, I should mention the reason for that is not just because women-led companies, whether they're in, large corporations or smaller venture capital-backed startups, see better financial performance regardless of what market they're in. We're investing in companies that improve environmental or human health. And so it tends to be lots of consumer decisions or patient, decisions. And women are making 85% or so of consumer purchase decisions. Home purchases, remodels, everything in the home, the food, the self-care products, like all that. And then on the healthcare side, they're not only 80% of the healthcare workforce, but they're making 80% of healthcare decisions for themselves, for their kids, often for their spouses, their parents, their aging parents-in-law. So they've got an outsized impact in what products, what services, what companies are being supported in those markets. But they also see what problems are not being solved or not being solved the way they'd like to, or what, they see
Right.
the opportunities. So they have an advantaged position to innovate and create something with immediate product market fit. So one of the things we look for, and one of the things we see for women entrepreneurs, is they're often solving a problem that they personally have, or that a friend or family member has. And so they're very passionate about solving this problem. I'm on the College of Engineering Advisory Board, UT Austin, and that one of the things they're really focused on is attracting and retaining more women into engineering. And I swear I have not met a woman yet who's, looking to join the school or is in the, college already, who doesn't have a specific problem she came there to try to work on. And it's always improving something about the environment or something about health. It's like
That's
across the board. Yeah. So, and it's not like, women aren't working on other social things or education or other positive things. It's just not usually through engineering. So my lens is like, all these women are really passionate about improving the world. They don't care about the machine shop tools or like the starting salaries or, that's a whatever means to an end, but it's not why they're there or staying there. So we look for that passion of this problem is something that they are put on the planet to go, work on, and they're going to do it no matter what. Which is really important because in the startup world, it's even if everything goes well, when you later get on the podcast of, how I did it or whatever, there's always a crazy roller coaster with massive ups and downs. And so that passion is necessary because you need tons and tons of grit. And so that's the other thing we look for. It's just, passion and grit are one. I'd say the other thing, if that's one bucket, is transparency. When we are doing diligence, you can tell pretty quickly if they answer the question the way they think they should versus completely honestly of like, I don't know. And that's actually one of the things that I need help on. And, do you know any experts in that area or whatever? And you realize then, okay, they're going to be transparent. So when there's a problem, they're going to come to us or the board or whatever and ask for help versus cover it up. And then you don't know until it's too late to fix it. So those are the two main things that we look for.
I love that. And those are those are true leadership traits, right? The transparency is huge for any leader, and the passion and grit, that they've got a chance of success. So that's awesome. I love that. Any new things that you're seeing in the human health industry that you really think are going to make a difference in the lives of women in the workplace even?
Yeah, definitely. There's like this new area called women's health. Just kidding. But I'm not kidding in that, like, there's been, because the venture capital world has been so male dominated and still is.
Yeah.
But the innovation dollars have been going to, B2B enterprise SaaS and like stuff like that, erectile dysfunction. But not to women's health or lots of other things like silver tech. There's just because again, like women are making those often helping the aging parents and aging parents-in-law and making all those, healthcare decisions for the family. And the traditional venture capital investor doesn't even see that as a big market potential, or doesn't understand it. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's also they just don't understand it. And when you're investing in early stage innovation, you're trying to reduce your risk. So if it's a market you're not familiar with, doesn't make sense for you to invest in that.
Right.
So it's this kind of, circular problem. So we're seeing tons of stuff in women's health, and it's been completely lacking innovation dollars because, of the nature of this male dominated kind of financial system. So, just bringing modern technology and science sometimes to women's issues is what we're seeing. Like menopause is a huge thing where it's just been, yep, that's menopause, go deal with it.
Right.
No, there's actually ways to deal with the symptoms and things you can do. You don't have to just live with it. And all kinds of things in, pregnancy and postpartum care that are getting a lot more attention now. Similarly, you don't have to just deal with it. And there's things you can catch much earlier that you can prevent entirely. things that I'd never wished that I knew about, but that we won't get into on this podcast that may or may not happen to us when we get older.
Okay.
But like you said, you had two autoimmune diseases. We're unfortunately seeing women in in the sandwich generation that are working full time, or not necessarily, but usually working, have children, have aging parents that they're having to care for, and boom, autoimmune diseases galore.
Yes.
It's just, I think women just embody their stress more versus out or something. It's just like, I don't know, that's my theory. But anyway, we've seen lots of platforms, diagnostics and health tech platforms and wellness and, things for mental health and figuring out, again, much earlier. So many people with autoimmune diseases go on for years and years and don't know what is wrong with them.
Yes.
And then finally get it diagnosed. So, ways to get things diagnosed faster. There's hope.
What's good, because what's so interesting to me, so one of my autoimmunes is rheumatoid arthritis. And I found out that I had it because it was, that you may or may not remember this, it was 2 Thanksgivings ago, and my knees swelled up and I couldn't walk and I was on crutches. It was like right before Thanksgiving. And then they went down for Thanksgiving. And then the day after they swelled up again. And so like that was a year ago, this last November. And they diagnosed it as rheumatoid arthritis. And I went to a rheumatologist and he was like, okay, well, nothing I can do. So just check back in whenever you start getting real, having a lot of pain and unable to walk or move. You just reach out to us and we'll, start giving you medication. And I'm like, no, like, okay, did I catch it? If I caught it early, like, let's do something about this. And it wasn't until I met with a holistic, functional medicine doctor, and she then diagnosed me with the Hashimoto's thyroiditis, in addition to the rheumatoid, that I learned how much the chronic stress was, a major player in that, and my diet and my environment, just the environment. So like so many things that nobody's talking about, so it's exciting to hear that at least the women are thinking about that.
Yes. Right. Again, it's like entrepreneurs that have a story that it happened to them, and they don't want other women to suffer, and like, let's fix this. This is not rocket science. It's just been overlooked.
Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, Sara. So excited for you that you've been able to take this path. You found your passion and you're pursuing it and helping others along the way. I do have a couple fun questions for you just to kind of wrap up our session. What is one thing that you do in your life that brings you sheer joy?
Love Cody Rigsby's Peloton classes.
Yes.
I'm like laughing to myself half the time with those.
He is awesome.
Like, oh God, I listen to Cody Rigsby again. He doesn't know who you are. I'm like, yeah, I do, but I still like him. I think spending times with friends and family, as generic as that sounds, is just prioritizing those relationships and relaxing, just.
Yeah. It's so important. And so we really do have to prioritize it. And it is a crazy thing, but it is so true. I'd probably say the same for myself. If you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, like 5 or 6-year-old self, what would you tell her?
Chill out. You don't need to get an A in every class. Yeah, seriously, just everything's gonna work out great, and you just need to smell the roses like a little bit more along the way versus like
I love it. Yes, I love it. Something about hindsight. Yeah. Okay. And then I know we both share a love of travel, and we've been to some amazing places, but what's been your favorite place you visited? And then what's on your bucket list?
Okay. Um, well, I guess the answer is probably India, even though it wasn't obviously the most luxurious place, like, I visited in
Yeah.
my time. But because of the timing of it being, and so the length of it, it was like 2.5 months. I've never
Oh,
done anything like that. So it was really not it was truly traveling, an adventure.
yes.
Um, and that was the first time my mind emptied out and I didn't have anything else to worry about or think about, even where I was actually very present. And I think that's why it was so great. It was like so much. It was, seeing such a different culture. And also being away from my life, for so long that
Yeah.
it was such a unique experience, unlike
I love that.
others. Then when I
Yeah.
went back for like work, was not my favorite place to visit, so it was
Right.
more just what it was in my,
Right.
life. And then on my bucket list, I think is Africa. I,
Mm.
I just have heard so many people talk about how life changing it is, actually, just seeing the, animals and the environment, and again, so different. So very
Awesome.
excited.
I
So
love it.
yeah, maybe next summer.
Well, Sara, this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much for the conversation. And I'm sure I'll see you at a family event soon.
Yes, you're welcome. This was my pleasure.
Thanks.